video today addresses an interesting misconception regarding provisions under the Third Party Financing Addendum. I was asked this week, if a buyer adds the Third Party Financing Addendum to the contract, but doesn't check either box under B1 for buyer approval, what does that mean? The first box under B1 says that the contract is contingent on buyer getting buyer approval from the lender, and you negotiate the number of days for that contingency. The second box says the contract is not contingent on buyer approval. The buyer's agent in this case said she didn't check a box because the buyer already had a buyer approval letter, so the provision was irrelevant. Unfortunately, leaving B1 blank leaves a material vagueness in the contract. By leaving B1 blank, the contract is not clear as to what happens if buyer cannot ultimately get buyer approval. The contract could be interpreted that the buyer has all the way until closing to terminate the contract based on buyer approval. As most of you know, a pre-approval letter does not bind a lender to provide the loan, and even if the lender has approved the buyer prior to contract, buyer could lose his job or do something to negatively affect his credit score prior to closing, so the approval is then pulled. In this particular instance, what the buyer's agent should have done when the buyer was confident in his approval is to check the second box that said this contract is not subject to buyer obtaining buyer approval. Remember, the financing provisions under the contract are contingencies in favor of the buyer. From a seller's perspective, any contingency that can be removed from the contract is a benefit. Please be careful when writing the contracts and don't make assumptions that certain provisions are irrelevant in particular circumstances. Always ask yourself the question, what are the consequences if something I assumed would happen doesn't happen? I hope you find our videos helpful in your practice. Please call on any of our team at Allegiance if we may be of service. Thank you.